At least.
Did you get a chance to read both essays or just one?
Yeah, I've read both of them, and I'm glad they're so short because there's so much to digest. And the first chapter was fine, but the second chapter was it's way over my head.
Well, hopefully we can help clarify some things and talk about it some. One thing that I'm a bit disappointed that neither Dembski nor Spencer mentioned, and I think it's materially relevant to the intelligent design argument, is the term I introduced you to last week. I'll write it out for this week. So there's this Greek word telos, right? So this Greek word telos means ultimate intent. So like, what's the telos of, say, a book? Telos of a book is for the author to communicate ideas for a reader in the language they both share.
Yeah.
So, like,
Yeah, it's their language, it's not mine.
well, the point being that this exists because some people wanted me, a reader, and several others, to read the ideas in here. So this doesn't exist by accident. It has a specific telos. It has a purpose, right?
Yeah.
So from this word telos, we get the word teleology, or you might sometimes see it. You might see it sometimes the teleological.
Yeah.
Can't write.
That's what we know what you mean.
So, the first week we talked about the cosmological argument, right? So, similar to the cosmological argument, the teleological argument is really just like this super broad genre of arguments that point to the existence of an intelligent personal creator. And that evidence is rooted in the telos of all sorts of things.
A personal creator, an intelligent personal creator, it points to? Okay.
So what are some other examples of telos that you can think of? And not just in like man-made things, I mean in nature, if you will. We saw one, it's actually mentioned in I think the first essay that we saw in the Truth Project a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, that bacterium flagellum?
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's terribly ironic when watching nature documentaries, with like Richard Attenborough, narrating over, the life of a zebra in the African, jungles or whatever. Often they'll say things like, they have blunt teeth in the back of their mouth. This is to chew, leafy greens and stuff like that. And like the language they use heavily implies purpose behind, the features that they're describing, or, describing like an octopus that, can spray a jet of ink, and this is to distract, predators, potential predators, what are they doing? They're pointing to telos, right? Obviously they would probably argue, it just happened to evolve that way, but I think it's just terribly ironic that the points of interest that they narrate in these shows talk about the purpose or the intent behind certain features of the wildlife and the plants and the animals that they're describing. So
evidence is overwhelming. I mean, they deliberately have to ignore so much stuff.
Well, I just think it's funny that it's difficult to escape using design language. Yeah. Like this is in order to, So what do you suppose the opposite of teleology is? This is getting into the second
Chip.
the second essay, second chapter
Yeah.
we read. So what do you suppose is the inverse of teleology? It's kind of a made up word, sort of a trick question.
I have no idea, but I know he talked a lot about adaptive systems, which I have a question mark by.
So the opposite of teleology, and this is kind of a made up word, is dysteleology. So we're focusing on intelligent design. There is, believe it or not, actually a argument from poor design. And to be fair, there is a lot of compelling evidence that certainly gives the appearance of flaw,
Yeah,
particularly in the human body. I mean,
yeah.
can you think of any examples of flaws that the human body has? I mean, Genesis, and when God curses Adam and Eve, he says, all right, you're messed up now. This is how it's going to be. I mean, there's pretty cut and dry example in Genesis. Can you remember what it was?
Pain in childbirth.
Bingo. So,
And tonsils.
yeah, the appendix, like we've never, I mean, what do we use the appendix for? But if you get appendicitis, I mean, you're practically dead before modern medicine anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, pain in childbirth, not just pain in childbirth, but like all sorts of things surrounding childbirth give this appearance of flawed design, particularly the fact that like the birth canal passes through the pelvic, the pelvic bone. And prior to, modern surgical procedures, if the baby's head was too big to pass through that pelvic opening, either the baby would die, the mom would die, or both. Now, this gets kind of tricky because as Christians, it's tempting to just attribute any perceived flaws in design to the fall.
Yeah, really.
I think it's a little bit more complex than that, but then when you really start digging down into it, this is just a rehashing of the problem of evil all over again, isn't it? And why it, like in the problem of evil, and we did a deep dive on the problem of evil in the On Guard semester last year. I'll put a link in the video up here. But the problem of evil asks the question: why does God allow bad things to happen? Obviously, there's two kinds of evil. There's natural evil, which is like natural disasters, volcanoes, hurricanes, tsunamis, things like that. That's nobody's fault. It just happens. But then there's moral evil, right? Moral evil is committing crimes against each other: stealing, murdering, rape, lying, cheating, stealing, things like that. So anyway, the argument from flawed or imperfect design, I would say, is essentially just a rehashing of the problem of evil. Why does God allow bad things to happen?
Yeah.
And I think it's because there is a flawed assumption. So here's why I brought my notebook. Because as I was reading about this dysteleological argument, the dysteleological argument goes like this. Remember we talked about syllogisms. So syllogisms are a series of premises that lead to a conclusion, right?
Okay.
So like premise one, all men are mortal, right? And then premise two, Socrates was a man. Conclusion, therefore, Socrates was mortal, right? So anyway, here's how the dysteleological argument goes. So premise one is, so P1 an omnipotent, omniscient,
Benevolent. come back to this idea of having free will.
I don't know if I'm gonna have room here.
The printing's getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah, I'm running out of room. I wish I had erased and started
yeah.
higher. Okay. Conclusion.
We should have a handout already printed up and then.
Yeah, maybe.
You got more good stuff.
That's talking about what the second chapter talked about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, all of his other stuff. You don't have to write all those out.
All right. So, when considering a syllogism like this, the important thing is to look at the premises and consider, are the premises more likely than true, and does the conclusion follow from these premises? When I saw this argument, I just was immediately like, really? That's the argument?
Yeah, really.
So which of these two premises or the conclusion do you think you would object to?
Well, according to the story, or the
Yes,
chapter, he did not create all things in optimal design.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right?
Well,
Right. Well,
we don't know.
yeah, his approach was surprising to me. It heavily implied evolutionary, theistic
Theological
evolution.
reasons.
Well, no, it heavily implied theistic evolution, particularly the sentence where he says, this.
Talks about-
Here he says,
the last paragraph says.
no, it's in the middle. He says, I don't know of a single unequivocal example in which he has done so. This is not to deny miracles. I'm simply saying that I don't know of any examples of miraculous structures in nature, and that includes biological structures. That heavily implies necessity, that evolution was a necessity, but he doesn't say it explicitly. We're not going to go down that rabbit trail. But anyway, which of these two premises or the conclusion do you think is the weakest? Like, if someone presented you with this argument, would you be like, I don't know about that?
He said we don't have the whole picture.
That's
Sort
true.
of thing. We don't know.
Yeah, so on that note, I would say that premise number one is the flaw, because it says an omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent creator God would create organisms that have optimal design.
Yeah.
Would he?
Uh-huh.
How do you know that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, like, are you God? You know the mind of God?
Uh-huh.
So this is a rehashing of the problem of evil. The problem of evil is like an omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent God would not allow evil and suffering to exist.
Yeah.
Well, how do you know that? there's hidden assumptions that God prefers a world without evil and suffering, and that God is able to prevent a world without evil and suffering. And unless you can prove both of those assumptions are true, then the first premise falls all by itself. So the same is true here. An omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent creator, God would create organisms that have an optimal design. Well, how do you know that he would prefer that? Like, you're making the assumption that God would prefer that world, when evidently he doesn't. I mean, I would argue that the perceived flaws, the suboptimal design or the poorly designed argument, is just a rehashing of the problem of evil.
Say that again.
It's just a rehashing. It's just a rewording of the problem of evil. It's just digging up the problem of evil all over again.
Yeah.
And it's done so in a way as to try to counter the intelligent design argument, but the intelligent design argument is more of an argument against randomness, rather than like in favor of like optimal purpose. So I suppose maybe one lesson to learn from this, particularly in the second, from Spencer's argument or Spencer's essay, is that it's not about perfection. It's not about the way we would expect things to be. It's more about the likelihood of these things happening just by accident.
Yeah. And it really comes down to, it comes down to a lot more, but ultimately love. God wants a loving relationship.
Right, and that's why I use the word personal, remember?
Yeah.
An intelligent, personal creator.
So when you understand that, you have to allow freedom of choice.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem of evil is that there has to be the chance to do rebellion and evil against the Creator. So it comes back to Romans 1:17. Men deliberately suppress the truth.
Yeah, there's intelligent design is taboo in a lot of colleges and academia. That's what this is a documentary on. And if we have time, we can watch some parts of it. But a lot of people he interviewed, non-Christians, very smart people in academia, and asked them their thoughts on intelligent design, and they think it's all hogwash and it's just a reason to get creationism in academia, and then they get it in schools, and then they're bringing prayer back into schools. And but intelligent design in of itself doesn't necessitate our God. Right. It's just a designer.
Right.
And
same thing with the cosmological argument. This isn't Christianity, although it's totally compatible with Christianity.
Sure.
But this is just generic theism. It just points to a God, not necessarily.
And then they self-admit, and this actually in this video, Richard Dawkins is admitting to, well, maybe life is deposited here from aliens.
Say that one more time.
So Richard Dawkins, he in this video, in the interview with Ben Stein, he self-admits that he believes life could have been deposited here from outside, aliens or something else.
But then that gets back to where they come from.
Yeah, and where they come from. So everything in science and all of that, they say they have an open mind and to look at all possibilities, and you can look at every possibility except intelligent design.
Yeah, that's the whole gist of it. Yeah, they don't even want to investigate it because they know, just like evolutionists, they got something that takes them away from accountability to the Creator. That's what it always boils down to that. And that's why in witnessing from now on, I'm going to always, unless they're open and willing to be, examine the facts. But otherwise, I'm going to say, You prove the Bible is true by your deliberately suppressing everything. You won't even examine it. You won't take the time, even though there's those that claim that there's so much evidence that if you examine it, you cannot help but come to the conclusion. And so you won't even do that. And so you're proving that you are deliberately suppressing the truth that is available to you. And you are showing that the Bible is true because that was written 2,000 years ago. And nothing has changed. It's been all through history is evidence that man doesn't want God to rule over him. So anyway, and how do you disagree with that? And find out how they disagree. So I mean, you came up with something that was even better, but I think it's tremendous to have all this evidence, but if they're not even willing to look at it objectively, the best thing to do is to show them they're guilty of rebelling against God. And that's really all we can do, is to point out the truth, and then God, the Holy Spirit, can take all of that and work circumstances where they're gonna, like me with a car accident and facing death. Oh, maybe I should examine some of this stuff. So anyway, that's where I'm boiling down to dealing with people, because today Dennis Prager, he says the left doesn't, truth is not one of their values. They completely eliminate truth. It's the end justifies the means, and so it's really a different way to approach having to know all this. I mean, the better you know it, the more you can point out these things. Are you aware of this and this and this? And what do you do with that? I mean, you just poo-poo it. Okay, well, that's your choice, but God gave you a choice. So anyway, that's, I'm a broken record.
Well, and people's truths, if you're to tell them you're suppressing the truth, and go, well, whose truth is true?
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
That I would say they're just, if they're not able to have a rational, good argument, just a conversation about it.
Yeah.
And they're not willing to look at different evidences. It's not, they're shooting themselves in the foot on that point.
Yeah, the idea that whose truth is something that is what they bring up all the time. Your truth is yours and my truth is mine, and it's a cop-out, but it's hard to get around it. So, but anyway, we can't persuade somebody anyway. So if we realize that God's gotta, if they have hardened their heart, which is what people today, the left in particular, if you don't like to get into politics, but I think it's a perfect example. They just, it's one lie after another, and people are just fall for it, like, and it's because they want to believe the lie. And that's what it says in the last days, that they're going to believe the lie. And I'm not sure just what that lie is, but it's the fact that the man can be accepted on the basis of his own merits rather than through Christ. I don't know if that's the lie or not. That's a whole nother.
Big one, yeah. It's so multifaceted. I mean, there's so many pieces of it's a big topic. Politics in the world and society.
Yeah.
But being a good person, that's a pretty big one that most every world religion it has in common.
Yeah.
If you're a good person, you go to heaven, you'll be one of the universe, or reincarnation, come back as a better person, or X, Y, Z. All of them have shared that commonality, except for us, our belief.
Yeah, so that comes down, that's pretty much the bottom line, I think, is I'm a good person, and God is God's a good God, so he knows how hard I've tried to be good. I have my flaws, but basically I want to do what's right, and so God's gonna accept me. And which God are you picking here? So yeah, it's a different world from back in the 50s when I grew up. Pretty much most people accepted the fact that the Bible was the Word of God, and they accepted certain truths that God existed and all of that. But now it's gone way past that. So it's
Yeah, world of difference.
yeah,
The foundations of people believed on back then versus now,
right.
completely different.
Yeah, it is. It's in
So things that in your generation, and I'd say part of mine, growing up, we almost take that for granted. People now,
yeah.
they don't grow up believing there's a God, a creator, these different things. It's just so different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what the Bible predicted. So I mean, as it was in the days of Noah, if you ever listen to David Jeremiah, yeah, he's going through the rapture basically, and his message. I used to listen to him all the time, but I haven't. But I happened to listen to the one on Noah, and he really drives the point home that. And in the days of Noah, everybody was eating and drinking and carrying on just as though the way life has been all these years. And they missed the whole point of how evil everything is getting. And I'm amazed with all that's going on in this world and how it's going downhill so fast. They're just carrying on as usual. And that's what the days of Noah is part of it. And he goes into 3 other areas, and I got to go back and listen to it and write them down, because there are 4 hanging points that were just, to anybody that has eyes to see, they're obvious. That so it's
Or you'd hope it would be obvious to them, but it's obvious to us.
well, yeah. For people that have eyes to see, I say they're obvious, and a mind that's open.
I have a question, and you probably discussed it, it sounds like you did, but how do you refute your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth? How do you respond to that?
That's easy.
All right, that's easy. I got a few lines here to write it down.
Well, let me finish writing this out.
And yeah, specified complexity,
that's
I
his-
had a
That's his
question.
main point, specified complexity. Yeah, I need to understand it better.
I have a question on that, and material causes, so how would you?
give it a shot, Randy?
Yeah, so, I mean, what is the definition of truth? They're using these terms as if
Everybody
they
understands.
don't, well, not in that, I would say that statement of, they'll say, my truth is my truth, and your truth is your truth. They're not even using that word in the correct context. They would say, your beliefs are your belief, and my beliefs are my beliefs.
Yeah, that's a better.
But truth, something's either objectively true or not true. Is it factual, not like.
But how can you say it's factually true? Isn't that, I mean, you can get into the moral arguments that we all agree that rape is wrong, or that murder is wrong, but they're not gonna all agree that abortion is wrong.
Yeah,
I mean,
those are good.
I guess I'm just wondering, cause I can see me getting that if I were talking to someone, and I'll use my brother-in-law, I can imagine, or my niece-in-law, coming up, they're highly intelligent people, and I can imagine that being just a basic one, and me going, oh gee, I don't know.
So,
Yeah, that's a good question.
I would
Your answer, what
I would reword
definition
it.
of truth?
I would reword it this way. I would say, so what you're saying is essentially this. How do you know that that's not true for you, but not for me? Can something be true for you, but not true for me? And the answer is, what about the statement, that's true for you, but not true for me? Is that true for you but not true for me? It's what's known as a self-refuting statement. It's something that refutes itself by its own logic. So
I
if,
don't understand what you mean.
From tactics.
yeah. So if I were to say, well, that's just true for you, but that's not true for me.
Yeah, you hear that.
Let's apply that logic to itself. Can something be true for you but not for me? Well, okay, sure. Let's say that is true. Something can be true for you but not true for me. Is that true for you but not true for me, or is it true for both of us? The sentence itself refutes itself.
Yeah, it's hard to fathom that though. I mean, it's confusing.
I'm trying to think of another example. What's another popular example of a self-refuting statement?
Yeah, I was going to bring one.
Here's a perfect example of another self-refuting statement. Nothing can be gained, like no knowledge can be gained outside of that which is scientifically observable.
Oh, yeah.
So unless you can test it and observe it scientifically, it's not truth. That sentence, can you test that with science? No. Well, so then is that knowledge? Does that make sense? So if I were to say, well, there's no such thing as knowledge outside of anything that can be tested scientifically, that sentence itself cannot be tested scientifically, so therefore it makes itself false. It's a self-refuting statement. So if someone were to say, well, you have your truth and I have my truth, then the very next question is that true for both of us or just one of us? And which one of us is it true for?
So a good one is, if I say, there is no truth.
Yeah, exactly. Is that true?
Yeah,
that's probably the most basic form.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
probably the best one right there.
Yeah. So when someone starts talking about, oh, that's true for you, but that's not true for me, or you have your truth, I have my truth, really they're getting into dangerous water there because they're undermining the reasoning of their own argument. It's a self-refuting statement.
Yeah,
it might not be readily obvious, but
you can't have an intelligent conversation if you can't agree on terms. And
Sean McDowell has a list of some common ones, that being one of them. Another one being, you should not judge.
yeah, oh yeah, that's
that's another one. To say the statement, you shouldn't judge other people, you're judging other people.
yeah, good.
Or
don't
don't impress, like don't impose your religious beliefs on me. Well, by saying that you shouldn't impose your religious beliefs on someone, you're imposing your beliefs on someone else, telling them they shouldn't impose their beliefs on someone.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's what's helpful in tactics, is to get those kind of things down. I'm sure other people have written about it, but boy, his book kind of is a classic, I think.
The whole idea of a truth, right? It's something that we think is correct, verifiable. It's objective reality. It's reality. It's true, right? That's the concept that people think of truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if something's true, and they have this idea of this whatever's true, they're saying the statement, well, my truth's my truth and your truth's your truth. If they're opposing statements, like if I say water's blue and you say water's green, that's true for me and true for you. They both can't be at the same time true.
unless you're colorblind.
Yes.
And that's what?
Unless you're colorblind.
Oh.
Well, but are there truths that are true independent of whether or not there are actually even any agents to act upon them? Like, let's say that God never made humans. He made just the universe with plants and animals, and there are no moral agents to act on. Is it still true that it would be morally wrong to torture a child for fun? Even if there's nobody around to actually do that, is it still true that it's wrong to torture a child for fun?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still true. Even if there are no children, even if there are no humans, Even if there's no one around to do that thing, it's still true that it's wrong to do that thing. And that's, I think, that's the difficulty that I think a lot of people have when talking about moral quandaries like, abortion and things like that. It becomes much more nuanced and difficult to see the obvious, truth of the moral claim that's being made. So that's why torturing children for fun is my go-to, because I can't think of a single person who would agree that, yeah, I think it is morally acceptable to torture a child for fun.
Yeah.
So there's a response to the truth one. Oh, sorry, did I breed you?
No, go ahead.
Good, I have another question after that.
So what's true for you isn't true for me. So he says, if so, then this claim is only true for the one who makes it and isn't true for anyone else. If so, then why is the person bothering to make the claim in the first place? Since it obviously believes it doesn't apply to others.
Right. Then just
Tell
keep it
me
to
that
yourself.
again, please.
He says, so what's true for you isn't true for me. If so, then this claim is only true for the one who makes it
So he's wasting his breath.
and isn't true for anyone else. If so, then why is the person bothering to make the claim in the first place, since he obviously believes it doesn't apply
It doesn't
to
apply
others?
to anybody else. If it doesn't apply to anybody else, then why are you making this claim? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, those are all so good, and they make sense for most people
That's pretty funny.
that I, and myself included. It's hard to follow when you understand it, it makes perfect sense, but following the whole argument is it takes a little bit to wrap your mind around it, and because those are.
So I think the simplest answer to your question, Debbie, is to try to apply the logic of the claim that someone's making to itself. So if someone is making a claim that's self-refuting, show them that it refutes itself by applying the logic of their claim to itself.
Well, my question, all right, you said two things about don't impose your religious beliefs on others. That's imposing their belief on you, but you shouldn't judge others. I didn't grasp what you said as a way to refute that. When you say you shouldn't judge others, well, people say that. You shouldn't judge others. So
Right.
What do you
So
say?
if someone accuses you of judging others, they are themselves judging you by accusing you of judging other people. They're guilty of the very crime that they're accusing you of. That's the point.
Yeah. And really, when you go into what the actual passage says, what is the definition of judging someone? And the idea in that passage is that you're condemning them. You're taking the place of God as though you have the final authority to say they are guilty. And that there's a difference between discernment and judging. And God says we are to be discerning and to understand and the context there. I haven't studied it for a while, but it's in the context. It's.
Well, and you're right. There's a difference between discernment and judgment.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't understand that, or even know that.
Yeah. Good. You're better explaining what I want to say.
And you're passing a judgment,
Yeah.
making a statement versus you're deciding, okay, what's what. That's not. They're two different things.
Well, how would you
People mix them up.
determine, like that guy that was just convicted of murder that killed that teenager at Walgreens, stabbing her 42 times? Did they judge him or did they discern him? Because I would think they judged him.
Yes.
Yeah.
They have to
And
discern.
rightfully
They have
so.
to have the discernment. It's part of the process in judgment. You can't judge anything without first discerning.
But it's okay to judge people at times.
Well, you got to clarify that. So,
Okay,
are,
I'm
are
open
you
to
making
that.
a moral judgment, Or are you, what type of judgment?
I would
Like,
say
are you
it's
saying
both.
they're gonna go to hell?
No, I'm saying that he needed to be either put to death or put in prison for life, which is what he got. So I would say it was both a moral judgment and a legal judgment.
So,
Right, I think we're making categorical mistakes here. The judgment in that case is more of a conviction according to the law versus making value statements. So when someone says, "Oh, don't judge other people," what they're accusing you of doing is making value statements about people, saying that, "Oh, this person has less value because they dress a certain way or they talk a certain way," or so what they're doing is they're accusing you of making unfavorable value judgments.
Okay.
But in the court of law, that's a different type of judgment, in the sense that you're convicting someone of a crime that they committed and carrying out the consequences
Okay.
of their actions. So you're in a court of law, say a murderer. I suppose with the exception of capital punishment might be slightly different. But when you convict someone of a crime, you're not making a value statement about them. You're not saying that because you were found guilty of murder, you're therefore less valuable than all other people. I don't think that's ever really been the case. In fact, someone might argue, and this is why I brought up capital punishment, someone might argue that when handing down a sentence of capital punishment, of the death penalty, you've just reduced the value of their life to zero because you're sentencing them to death, right? But I would argue, as someone who favors the use of capital punishment, that you're not actually making a value judgment of that person's life. It's carried out as a punishment for the fact that the criminal has surrendered their right to live. So, meaning the punishment fits the crime. So if someone kills another person, then they have themselves just surrendered their right to live. Which is
kind of like the arrows. He was talking about the targets you're shooting arrows.
Oh, yeah.
So if they're
yeah,
shooting
that's
an
another
arrow-
thing that I was just like, dude, just call it what it is. Like with the whole teleology thing, that's a classic example of the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. So the Texas sharpshooter fallacy is an informal statistical fallacy where a Texas cowboy takes his gun and just shoots randomly at the side of a barn, and then goes and paints targets around clusters where he shot the side of the barn. And then goes, "Look how good I am. I hit the bullseye like 50 times here, 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 and here." When in reality, he didn't shoot the targets. He just shot randomly and then went and painted the targets. So what it is essentially is cherry picking. You're choosing to favor data that supports your argument and ignore data that is unfavorable.
And back to the judgment.
Yeah.
So if
Sorry, that was kind
So-
of
No,
so-
I just want
right,
Randy
all-
to say too.
soapbox tangent.
right, government is, the Bible talks about governments and leaders, and God put these governments and these leaders in place, and there's the laws of the land, and the Bible talks about that. So there is a place for that in the Bible, and in
Mhm.
God's plan and rules, and they're there. If you break them, you're going to get punished according to the laws of the land. That's 100% verifiable by the Bible. That's part of, God approves that. So if you have these laws of the land and you break them, well, you're going to get punished. So, and like John was saying, they gave up the right.
Right, and it's not, the judgment that's being carried out isn't making a value statement about that person. The people carrying out the sentence might. I mean, how often do you hear, corrections officers and police officers and, people involved in the justice system talking about criminals in a unfavorable way? Like, "Oh, he's that piece of garbage over there killed his daughter," or whatever, Like, people talk like that, but that isn't the purpose of the punishment. So the judgment that we're talking about in a court of law is categorically different from the judgment that is taking place when someone says, well, don't judge other people. When you say don't judge other people, you're accusing them of making a value statement about another person. So for example, let's say you were commenting about how someone's an alcoholic, and somebody else is like, oh, don't judge them. They're accusing you of making value statements about them being less of a person because they're an alcoholic. But in reality, they're guilty of their very own crime that they're accusing you of, because they're making value statements about you for judging someone else. They're saying you're less of a person because you're judging someone else for being less of a person.
Yeah.
So it's kind of self-refuting.
Romans chapter 2 goes into that in detail. I mean, Paul talks about you that are judging the Gentiles or the Jews, I forget which way. But anyway, you're guilty of the same things, and we're all guilty in different areas, but we're all guilty.
Right. And so the punishment, back to like the courts and the laws and whatnot. If, for example, and we don't do this, they used to do that. If you steal, you get your hand chopped off in certain parts. That might still be the case in some parts of the world, but that's a punishment, or someone will view it as a consequence. And if you go in front of a judge or whatever, they'll judge you. The term's going to kind of get grayed, the areas kind of. But anyways, those are there. So it's not, oh, we're going to punish him because his morals or his views or because his color or his skin or anything. It's, you did this, that's what happens.
Right. It's not about how much of a person you are. It's more about consequences for your actions.
It's kind of from a different angle. Peter, how many times should I forgive a person? And is 40, what
77. 70 times 77.
70 times 7,
7.
yeah. And then, okay, then I can take revenge.
So that's why you got to clarify what do you mean by judgment, because the term.
Yeah.
Right. In this case, it's a categorical
terms are,
error.
you got to define them to begin having we got to agree on terms. Yeah. And that we need to remember that in our conversations with what do you, like, which you do very well. What do you mean by that, or what does that mean to you? So yeah, that's great to
Don't know if that answered your question, David.
Well, he gave me more notes, I try to write things down because I hand coordination.
Mhm.
That got me through college. Well, I didn't finish college, but got me good grades for what I did.
So back to intelligent design.
Yeah, go ahead. and I have to leave shortly. I'll leave at 10 o'clock, I guess. So can you go through that you got on the board there?
Yeah, so this is the criteria that William Dembski gives for what he calls specified complexity.
Right.
These are the things that he looks for as what he calls the signature of an intelligent designer. So I wrote it on the board because I wanted to try to pick your brain for ideas of like what examples can we point to as Christians for specified complexity? Like, where do we see examples of this? So the first one is contingent, therefore not necessary. Well, we talked about that in the cosmological argument. The difference between contingent and necessary. Contingent means it is the way it is, but it could have been some other way. So contingent means that something is only the way it is because something else caused it to be that way. Whereas necessary means it's going to be that way no matter what. It has to be that way.
Yeah, that's a tricky word, contingent. So yeah, that helped to understand it a little better.
All right. I know we did that. I know you just said it, but finish again, because that was one of my questions. Contingent is the way it is because something caused it to be.
Exactly.
And necessary, tell me again what you just said.
So necessary is what it sounds like. It has to be that way. Like, it can't be any other way. So it's by necessity. It's necessary. It's not caused by something else. It has to be the way that it is.
Because that was a question I have. If it is contingent and therefore not necessary, could not wrap my mind around that.
Yeah, me too.
Well, contingency and necessity are mutually exclusive. So if it's not necessary, then it has to be contingent. If it's not contingent, then it must be necessary. They're mutually exclusive terms.
A simple version of just the word contingent. Right? The adjective contingent can be used to describe something that can occur only when something else has happened first.
Something else caused it to be the
Yeah,
way that
it has to have a cause, in other words.
Right, exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
The good result, making money is contingent on finding a good paying job.
Or stealing it, or.
Something has to happen.
Right. Well, the point is that money isn't necessary because if money were necessary, it would just appear. It had to appear. You didn't have to do anything to get it. It just there it is, and that doesn't happen. That never happens.
Yeah, before money, they
I wish it did.
exchanged different abilities to and functions to exchange with. So, well, that was the hardest word, the contingent word. So that's, and I'll read it again with a dictionary.
Maybe a better way to look at contingent is dependent. So if something is
that's it.
contingent,
Oh, yeah.
it depends on something else. So like when somebody says, what are your hobbies? Well, that depends. Depends on what? Depending meaning like it depends on something else in order to get the result.
Right, very good. That helped.
Depends on something to get something else with a habit or a hobby.
Well, that was just a random example that I gave. I mean,
I know, but it's hard for me to understand. I
So
always have the question.
in that example, it'd be like, well, it depends on the weather.
Pardon?
Okay.
Because if it's windy, then
Okay.
I like to go fly a kite, or
Okay.
if it's raining, then I'll stay inside and watch movies. So it's contingent on, say, like the weather or the time of year. So
Okay,
it depends on some other factor.
okay. Well, that makes sense now. Okay. Okay.
So contingent, meaning that if it had to be that way, then it might not have been caused by an intelligent source.
It might not have.
Right. So if something is necessary, then how could you explain it with an intelligent designer? If it was necessary, then it had to be that way. So why would you attribute it to an intelligent designer? That's why contingency is a criteria of specified complexity.
Now, if it's necessary, how does that exclude an intelligent design? If it's necessary, like breathing is necessary. Is that a good example?
Yes, but breathing is necessary for staying alive. So again, I think that might be a categorical error. Let's take God for example. Oftentimes people will say, well, then what caused God? Who created God? If
Yeah.
God created everything, then who created God?
I know, I was thinking about that the other night.
So God is necessary. He doesn't have a creator. He has to exist. So if God has to exist, then we need not ask, well, then who created God? Because then you would get an infinite regress. Well, if you have an answer for who created God, then who created the creator of God? And then who created the creator of the creator of the creator of God? And then you just get this infinite regress. But because God is necessary, then there is no possible world where God doesn't exist. God exists in all possible worlds because God must exist. He's the necessary. He is the necessary.
Because and I know that there's things we won't understand, but I will find myself thinking about how did God always exist? At what point, how can you always exist? Somebody once said it's our Western linear thinking. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
No, totally, it does.
But there was no beginning. I will lay in bed at night and think about that.
It's impossible to get your head around. The only hope that I have for wrapping my head around it is to just look at it like a film strip. So time is like a film strip, right? So if I'm holding a film strip, I can see all the frames of the film, and I can see the beginning of the film, I can see the middle of the film, I can see the end of the film. So I can see the whole film all at once. Holding that film, I exist outside the sequence of that film. So I exist independent of the beginning, middle, or end of the film. So in the same way, God exists independent of time. So he exists outside of time. So he doesn't have a beginning or an end because he's outside of that linearity, if that makes sense.
No.
It's
Because there's no
yeah,
beginning. That's
right.
the part I can't understand. It's not that I don't accept it.
Right.
It's
No,
I
no,
don't
I- yeah.
understand it. You know, I mean, he never had a beginning.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, I'm taking us off of this.
No, but it's true. It's true. It is really difficult to wrap your head around. But God doesn't depend on anything else for his existence.
Mm-mm.
So he's necessary. He has
Okay.
to exist. There is no possible world where he might not exist if something else didn't happen. He doesn't depend on anything else, so he exists necessarily.
Okay.
The second one, complex, therefore not readily reproducible by chance. I think that second part, therefore not readily reproducible by chance, is the key, because if it's sufficiently complex and not readily reproducible by chance, then in that case, it makes more sense to point to an intelligent designer than it does to chance.
Mm-hmm.
And
That one was easy.
a perfect example of that is the fine-tuning of the universe. And I really wish there was an essay in this book, Evidence for God, for fine-tuning. We did fine-tuning in On Guard. The odds of our universe existing the way that it does, I would say, is even more inconceivable than trying to wrap your head around the fact that God has no beginning and no end. So this is going to blow your mind. The universe, in a nutshell, the fine-tuning of the universe argument goes like this. The universe has a whole host of constants and quantities in physics that, if they were just one part in millions of, if it was just one little digit off, we wouldn't be here. There would be no life. There would be no chemistry. There would be no planets. There would be no light. Like, the physical structure of our universe just couldn't support life of any kind, much less human life.
Well, the only examples I can think of, I can't think of millions of examples. I can think of the fact that they say if we were closer or further away from the sun.
Oh, it's
That's
much
one.
worse than that.
Yeah, I was
It's
going to
much
say,
worse
see,
than
I
that.
don't know any other.
It is so much worse than that.
I think gravity was one.
The gravitational constant is one. So the gravitational constants are fixed numbers, where when you plug them into mathematical equations in physics, it's always the same. And if it were slightly different, you would get a different outcome. So what scientists have done is they've rewound the videotape, to use an archaic term, of the universe. We've rewound the tape and looked at the initial conditions at the beginning of the universe and done the math to get where we are now. And the numbers that they had to put in, those initial constants and quantities to get where we are now, when they put it into, the Big Bang, the beginning of the universe, it is so precise that Roger Penrose has said that the odds of our universe supporting life are...
Was that trillion one, 200 trillion or something?
Oh, there's lots of those statistics.
There was one you guys shared. It was either you guys did it or it was in the notes. Something about 200 times to the 10.
That's the odds of our universe existing to support life. It's 1 in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd.
I've never seen a math number that goes 3 levels high like that.
If you were to write this number out, 1 followed by all the zeros, that's more zeros than there are atoms in the entire observable universe. This number cannot be contained in our universe. And that's the odds of our universe, the way it is, to support life of any kind. So, the
Now,
question
who
you have to
came
ask
up with
yourself,
that number?
Roger
Is-
Penrose did.
But I mean, do non-Christians or non?
Oh yeah,
In
no,
the-
this is a big deal in the science community because scientists can't explain why we live in such an unlikely universe, to the extent where they've actually gone into the metaphysical. Science has actually stepped out of the scientifically observable and started making proposals for the multiverse. Have you heard of the multiverse?
Kind of.
So that's their
But tell me, I mean, I've heard the word and I couldn't explain it to
so
you.
that's their scapegoat. They look at this and they go, okay, sure, fine. Our universe is so incredibly, like, inconceivably improbable. But maybe our universe is just one of a whole bunch of other possible universes that all exist at the same time. And they're all being just like turned out by this machine that just creates universes. And ours is just one of an inconceivable number of other simultaneously existing universes.
How does that explain it? I don't understand.
It doesn't.
It doesn't
It
explain
pushes-
it.
kicks
It's-
the can down the
right,
road.
exactly.
It does.
It's just kicking the
Who
can down the
created
road.
the machine that makes the universe?
Exactly. And even if the multiverse existed, the machine that creates all these multiple other universes would require a lot of fine tuning itself. And who created that? Where did that come from?
And-
So the point is, the scientific community looks at this and says, oh crap, we've got some explaining to do. The reason is that there's 3 options to explain this. So the universe is
All right, you
incredibly,
write 'em down.
the universe is incredibly improbable. Like the chances of our universe existing in such a way that supports life, chemistry, planets, space, time, all of that is so improbable. How can we explain this? Well, there's 3 options. Either it's by necessity, it had to be that way. It's by chance, meaning we just got really lucky, or it's by design.
But you're not allowed to talk about design. So I found another self-refuting statement that kind of ties in well with this. It says the scientific method is the only means of knowing truth.
Right, that's what I was saying earlier. Like, okay, let's apply the scientific method to the statement. The scientific method is the only way to know truth.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that? How do you test that? You can't.
Mm-hmm.
So of those 3 options, we have a 1 in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd power chance of our universe existing. How do we explain that? Well, was it necessary? Did it have to happen? Well, obviously not. If it's a 1 in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd, that's probably the farthest thing from necessity. Like, it's so incredibly improbable. Like, you would expect, the odds of a different universe are so much more, overwhelmingly more probable. There's nothing that says that it would be necessary. So then maybe it was chance. Maybe we just got super lucky and rolled a pair of dice and got 2 6s 50 billion times in a row, which I think would be even that would be a charitable comparison. Or it's rigged.
Intelligent design.
So imagine we talked about this in On Guard. Imagine that you've been sentenced to death by firing squad. So like there's 100 guys, 100 trained marksmen, excellent sharpshooters. None of these guys have ever missed in their careers. 100 trained marksmen line up to shoot you. You're blindfolded, and you hear the command given, fire, and all the guns go off, and you're still alive. Would you question, man, I must be super lucky. 100 trained marksmen, all with bullets in their guns, all shooting at me, and all 100 of them missed? Or would you think to yourself, this is rigged. Somebody set this up so that I wouldn't die.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the fine-tuning of the universe, which I would argue is the most compelling intelligent design argument, because there's nothing you can point to that even comes close to the presence of an intelligent designer for the existence of our universe. I mean, with odds like this, if you were to write this number out, even if you were to write a 0 on every single atom in our universe, you would still run out of material, because this number is just so big. It's so big. There's no way that we just got that lucky.
Where does that come from? What book or what is that? I ordered Tactics. Haven't read it yet. I'm still reading my other books, and I got it. I haven't even opened the package, but the internet says I got it. Where would I be able to find that discussion?
It's Rudder Penrose. You could just Google fine-tuning of the universe.
Not Roger, it's Rudder.
Roger, Roger.
Penrose.
Penrose, yep.
And it's called Fine-Tuning the
Universe. Yep, the fine-tuning of the universe. So the fine-tuning of the universe is in reference to the constants and quantities, the numbers in physics that always stay the same. They're fixed. If they were different, it's kind of like what you were talking about. If the Earth were just 10 inches closer to the sun, we'd all burn up. Or if it was just 10 inches farther away, we'd all freeze to death. But it's so much worse than that, because let me give you an example.
There's so many.
Let's talk about like the gravitational constant. The gravitational constant is, I'm just going to make up some numbers because I'm not a physicist, but let's say the gravitational constant is 3.568921471789, right? So I'm just making up a number. And let's say we change this 1 to a 2. That number is now so different that we wouldn't have planets, we wouldn't have stars, we wouldn't have chemistry, we wouldn't have light, we wouldn't have, our universe just couldn't exist in such a way that humans would be here. There'd be no planets.
So there's a video William Lane Craig has put together. And in the video they have a dial. So you're just like a dial on a radio, right? You're turning the dial. And so he says this dial
has 1,000,000 ticks.
Yes, 1,000,000 of them. And you move it just one hair, the whole thing doesn't work.
And it's not just one thing. It's not just the gravitational constant. It's a whole bunch of things, which is that's why the scientific community is just this is not cool. Because all of these things that we're finding, you can't escape it. It points to someone who monkeyed around with physics and got things just right.
Well,
so
I'll throw this out there for the both of you to respond to. Why isn't the scientific community responding to these and denying intelligent design? I mean, if the math is just math, you can't argue with it. If the math points to it, why is it being ignored? I mean...
Oh, it's not being ignored.
Would be perfect for that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you want to put it in, go ahead.
Yeah.
It's what Chuck's been talking about. It's what the atheist Thomas Nagel calls the cosmological authority problem. And he admits that he doesn't want God to exist. Because if God exists, then that means he is subject to his authority. He doesn't want him to exist. He admits, I'm biased. I don't want God to exist because if he does, then that means I'm subject to his authority. I have to do what he says.
So they do address it, just like that. They say, and then another thing they say is, wow, if you're intelligent design, I should put it in.
Go for it.
There's a lot.
I got time.
So,
You guys got time?
so
I
what
got
they've
time.
done, what we were talking about earlier was what they've done is they've looked at all these numbers and they've said, well, okay, it's not God. It's we're just in one universe. Our universe is just one bubble in a whole ocean of other universes.
But our universe, that's all we're talking about. Even there,
Right.
there's the other ones.
Right, exactly. Exactly. But that's what they've done is they've just kicked the can down the road because they're trying to avoid evidence that points to a creator, even though this is arguably some of the most compelling evidence for a creator, because our universe could not exist unless all of these numbers were set just right. One of the illustrations in the video that Randy was talking about, they show all these objects delicately balanced on top of each other, and it pans, the camera pans down, it's, I don't remember, there's like an egg and there's like a chicken and there's like a house and there's like a pencil, and they're all stacked on top of each other, and the tip of the pencil is balanced on top of a razor. And it's all somehow, balancing. How could, I think it's a good analogy because those things can't balance by accident.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be delicately stacked.
How did life begin in the first place?
Every time.
Well, you never answered.
It developed, we are, you know what, we've been through this so many times, we have
Could
this
there have
so.
been an intelligent
Again, that's what this
designer?
I've heard of this video but never seen it.
Suppose we find, simply as a matter of fact, that our scientific inquiries point in one direction.
Which is that there is an intelligent creator.
Why should we eliminate that from discussion? Streng verboten? How come? Why?
Streng verboten. Very good. What does streng verboten mean? Strongly forbidden.
Strongly forbidden.
You've got two possible hypotheses. You've got a wall through the middle of through your brain, in effect, so you're thinking, saying, well, you can't consider anything on this side of the wall. Only hypotheses on this side of the wall are permissible for consideration.
What about academic freedom? I mean, can't we just talk about this?
Their reply is that science is not a democratic process.
Oh, really?
And that there is a consensus view.
But wait a
and that
minute,
we are to subscribe to
But
the
wait a
consensus
second, but
view.
Darwin challenged the consensus view, and that's how we got Darwinism. If Darwin wanted to challenge the consensus today, how would he do it? Science isn't a hobby for rich aristocrats anymore. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And if you want a piece of the pie, you've got to be a good comrade.
Scientific ideas. How we get them to you, the people. Every idea must be inspected to ensure that it is safe. All theories must pass through a series of checkpoints. First, the academy.
Getting a controversial theory through the academy can be dangerous. Few people know this better than Congressman Mark Souder. He uncovered a targeted campaign led by individuals within the Smithsonian and the National Center for Science Education to destroy Dr. Sternberg's credibility.
If you want peer reviews, if you want to be published, if you want to go to respected institutions, the core view does not tolerate dissent. There's kind of this is the way it is, and anybody who's
Cosby.
No matter how. Mr. Chapman claimed ID had nothing to do with religion. So why was my first stop Biola University, formerly known as the Bible Institute of Los Angeles?
I did teach Sunday school.
You mean tell me that there really is a debate among scientists about whether or not evolution occurred?
There we go. That's fine. I'll try and find it. But they blow it off and it's not real. It's just false. They're just trying to bring in creationism, but then later on they acknowledge, oh, it is so complex.
I should order this. You know, I haven't watched television at my house. I've watched it at other people's houses since April of last year. I just quit watching TV. I turned it on by accident by leaning on the controller. Couldn't figure out how to turn it off. It'd been so long. But this would be interesting to watch.
It's like Richard Dawkins.
Evolution is a fact. It's a fact which is established as securely as essentially any other fact that we have in science.
Richard Dawkins is so confident that evolution is a fact, and that therefore God doesn't exist, that he has devoted his entire life to spreading the evolution gospel.
I'm an atheist with respect to the Judeo-Christian God, because there is not a shred of evidence in favor of the Judeo-Christian God.
It is completely right to say that since the evidence for evolution is so absolutely, totally overwhelming, nobody who looks at it could possibly doubt that if they were sane and not stupid. So the only remaining possibility is that they're ignorant, and most people who don't believe in evolution are indeed ignorant.
But the people I spoke with weren't ignorant. They were highly credentialed scientists. So there had to be something else going on here. So you think the whole theory of evolution is false, or just certain parts of it?
Well, again, evolution is a slippery word. I would say minor changes within species happen. But Darwin didn't write a book called How Existing Species Change Over Time. He wrote a book called The Origin of Species. He purported to show how this same process leads to new species, in fact, every species. And the evidence for that grand claim is, in my opinion, almost totally lacking.
How does Darwin or Darwinism say life began?
Well, he didn't know, and in fact, nobody knows. So, Darwinism, strictly defined, starts after the origin of life and deals only with living things.
Well, how can there be a theory about life without a theory about how life began?
Well, a grand overarching evolutionary story, of course, does include the origin of life. But Darwin's theory doesn't begin until you have the first cell.
Well, does someone have a theory about how life began?
Oh, this guy's funny.
This is the story of a small planet in space called Earth.
For a typical Darwinian explanation of how life originated, Dr. Wells directed me toward this documentary.
The chemical elements essential for life, hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen, were now in place. What was needed was a way of combining them. Perhaps the energy came from lightning. Whatever it was.
Excuse me?
Whatever it was, energy managed to arrange these chemical ingredients in just the right way.
Whatever it was? I was hoping for something a little more scientific. The most popular idea has been that life emerged spontaneously from primordial soup. In 1953, Stanley Miller mixed water, methane, ammonia, and hydrogen to simulate the early Earth's atmosphere. Then he ran electricity through it in an attempt to jumpstart life. It didn't work. While the initial results seemed promising, 50 years later, most serious scientists have abandoned this approach in favor of alternate theories. Prominent Darwinist Michael Ruse attempted to explain one of them to me. He wasn't kidding. How did we get from an inorganic world to the world of the cell?
Well, one popular theory is that it might have started off on the backs of crystals. Molecules piggybacked on the back of crystals forming, and that this led to more and more complex. But of course, the nice thing about crystals is every now and then you get mistakes, mutations, and that this opens the way for natural selection.
But at one point there was not
Super
a living thing.
overly
And there was a living thing. How did that happen?
Well, this is I just told you. And I don't see any reason why you shouldn't go from very simple to more and more complex to more and more
I don't
complex.
either, but I don't know how you get from mud to a living cell. That's my question.
Yes, well, I've told you. I think
it's on the
try
back
one
of
more
crystals.
time.
On the backs of crystals.
On the backs of crystals is at least one hypothesis, yes.
So that's your theory, and you think that is more likely and less far-fetched than intelligent design?
I think it is.
I wouldn't put Ben Stein's money on Dr. Roos's joyriding crystals, but it did make me wonder, what were the chances of life arising on its own?
It's been speculated that probably there would have to be a minimum of about 250 proteins to provide minimal life function. If that's really true,
He wrote the Origin of Life
then I
article.
think it's
Walter
almost
Bratton.
inconceivable that life could have happened in some simple step-by-step way.
Okay, so the simplest form of life requires at least 250 proteins to function. What's so difficult about that?
Welcome to the Casino of Life. Who wants to spin for a chance to win?
Oh, sure. I'll give it a shot.
And there they said,
Take a
existing since 4 billion years ago. They've since now changed that. They keep changing it because it doesn't match up with what they're finding. Oh, well, we need more time to explain our theory. So now what do they say? It's 8 billion years old or whatever.
Really?
It keeps changing.
look at this.
How about the world's first single-cell organism? This perfectly aligned string of proteins could be yours.
Now, take a spin.
I won.
Tina, tell him how many times he needs to do that to win the prize.
250.
That's right, folks, and all in the correct order.
But that's impossible.
We've heard that before, haven't we, Richard?
Come on, Mother Nature, do your thing. You stupid machine! I hate you!
Only 250 times. That's not.
I'll
Mr. But maybe intelligent design should be suppressed. I didn't like what was happening to these scientists, but on the other hand, we don't want our kids being taught that the Earth is flat. It all began.
I'll stop it when I find it. But so that guy got fired, as he talked about. He mentions Stephen Meyer's intelligent design in one of his classes. So they fired him. And this guy's saying, Ben's explaining to him, this guy got fired, and he's like, no, there's no way. There must have been something else why he got fired. People don't fire people for talking about intelligent design. So then he goes through all these other people and their stories, and this guy and her.
That got fired?
Yep. That guy was tenured. Then he got fired. That guy was almost tenured. He got fired.
I
These
didn't know
people-
they could fire someone that was tenured.
Yeah. Oh, there it is.
That scientists could.
But you're not allowed to talk about it in public.
And so there is definitely
Oh, that's actually a good point. So these are other people who are still working that they didn't want to be on camera and fear of getting fired.
We want to.
Will you show us?
Try. Boys and girls, how would you like to show some of the ways we know of being quiet?
It's the kind of thing where you just learn to keep your mouth shut.
In addition to those scientists who are willing to appear on camera, we encountered many more who didn't dare show their face for fear of losing their jobs.
You use an intelligent design perspective to get the research done, but you're not allowed to talk about it in public.
And so there is definitely incentive, if you think about it, for people to remain within the mainstream.
You know, what's he up to? What is he thinking? Is he one of them? That kind of thing.
If I write intelligent design, they hear creationism. They hear religious right. They hear theocracy.
So it appears Mr. Shermer, the self-styled skeptic, was wrong on this one. Intelligent design was being suppressed in a systematic and ruthless fashion. But maybe intelligent design should be suppressed. I didn't like what was happening to these scientists, but on the other hand, we don't want our kids being taught that the Earth is flat or that the Holocaust never happened. It was time to ask the scientific establishment what was so bad about intelligent design.
Intelligent design people are not genuine scientists.
Intelligent design is a racket.
It's just propaganda.
The only intelligent thing about it is to got people to call it that.
It's really very stupid as well. Everybody knows science education in America is appalling. What we don't need at this time is intelligent design in the classrooms.
To present intelligent design stunts their educational growth, it stunts their intellectual growth.
But what I don't understand is how these animals could have been on Earth millions of years before man. And the Bible says the whole Earth was created in only 6 days.
It wasn't just the educational aspects of intelligent design that had scientists concerned. Many suspected the movement masked a much larger agenda.
Intelligent design is a set of excuses to squeeze creationism into the classrooms.
Get intelligent design in the schools today, and we can have school prayers tomorrow.
Any other complaints?
Can you imagine anything more boring? The boredom attached to ID is supreme. It is so boring that I can't even bother to think about it. It's just utterly boring.
That's not response to ID. Not very good. This whole documentary is pretty good.
Okay.
See if I can find Richard Dawkins in the end here. So yeah, I'll find this. So, yes, that's the second essay. And they talk about what they're talking about. That's their response to intelligent design. Well, if it was, it should be perfect. There shouldn't be nothing wasted. It should have be optimally designed.
I've been tempted to think that way, to be honest. And what I'm realizing is that it's just the problem of evil all over again. Like why should we think that we know what God wants?
I'd seen the chilling effect that this on some other consequences.
No gods, no life after death, no ultimate foundation for ethics, no ultimate meaning in life, and no human free will. Are all deeply connected to an evolutionary perspective. You're here today and you're gone tomorrow, and that's all there is to it.
Dr. Will Provine, professor of the history of biology at Cornell University, gave us another disturbing glimpse into where Darwinism can lead.
Oh, I was a Christian, but I never heard anything about evolution because it was illegal to teach it in Tennessee.
Dr. Provine's first biology professor changed all that.
He started talking about evolution as if it had no design in it whatsoever. And I came up to him and I said, "You've left out the most important part." And he said, "If you feel the same way at the end of one quarter, I want you to stand up in front of the students in this class and tell them this deep lack in evolution." And I read that book so carefully, I could find no sign of there being any design whatsoever in evolution. And I immediately began to doubt the existence of a deity. But it starts by giving up an active deity. Then it gives up the hope that there's any life after death. When you give those two up, the rest of it follows fairly easily. You give up the hope that there's an imminent morality. And finally, there's no human free will. If you believe in evolution, you can hope for there being any free will. There's no hope whatsoever of there being any deep meaning in human life. We live, we die, and we're gone. We're absolutely gone when we die.
Dr. Provine is no stranger to the prospect of death. Nearly a decade ago, he was diagnosed with a large brain tumor.
Let's suppose my tumor comes back, as it almost certainly will. Well, I'm not going to sit around like my older brother did last year, and he was dying of ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. He wanted desperately to die, but we couldn't help him die. I don't want to die like that. I'm going to shoot myself in the head long before then. I'm going to do something different.
I hope these are empty words for my friend Dr. Provine, because shortly after this interview was recorded, he learned his brain tumor had returned.
I don't feel one bit bad about holding the views that I do. There's not anything in the views I hold that makes me, oh, I wish I had free will, or oh, I wish there were a God. I don't ever wish that.
Dr. Provine.
I was just playing that because what he said, logically, that's what follows if you believe in evolution. There's no God, and there's no morals, there's no free will, we're just here, we exist, there's nothing after life, and it's sad and depressing, but that's, if you believe in evolution, and there's no God, then that's what follows. And I like he admits that, and he's honest about that, because that's the truth about that.
But what gets me is it's so sad, and I know I come from a Christian view, but my sister's in-laws and even my family, to think that they reject God, because I do believe in a heaven and a hell, and it makes me sad. It makes me sad.
Yeah, they go into the concentration camps and talk about eugenics and whatnot. What logically follows, if there's no God and there's no right or wrong, then is this stuff actually bad? Here we go.
Unforgiving control freak.
Here's Richard Dawkins.
By Matt.
Hello, Professor Dawkins. How are you? I'm Ben Stein. I'm sorry to keep you waiting. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
You have written that God is a psychotic delinquent invented by mad, deluded people.
No, I didn't say quite that. I said something rather better than that.
Oh, what? Please tell us what you said. Please tell us.
Well, I would have to read it from the book.
No, please.
The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully.
So that's what you think of God?
Yeah.
How about if people believed in a God of infinite lovingness and kindness and forgiveness and generosity, sort of like the modern day God? Why spoil it for them?
Oh,
why not just let them have their fun and enjoy it?
I mean, I don't want to spoil anything for anybody. I write a book, people can read it if they want to. I believe that it is a liberating thing to free yourself from primitive superstition.
So religion is a primitive superstition?
Oh, I think it is, yes.
So you believe it's liberating to tell people that there is no God?
I think a lot of people, when they give up God, feel a great sense of release and freedom.
Why do you think that? I mean, what's your dad? What's your scientist? What's your dad?
I think, well, I've had a lot of of letters saying that, and I've...
There are 8 billion people in the world,
Yeah,
Dr.
I
Dawkins.
know.
How many letters have you
No,
had?
I haven't got that's quite true.
Professor Dawkins seemed so convinced that God doesn't exist that I wondered if he would be willing to put a number on it.
Well, it's hard to put a figure on it, but I mean, I put it as something like, 99% against or something.
Well, how do you know it's 99%?
I don't.
Say 97.
No, I did. You asked me to put a figure on it, and I'm not comfortable putting a figure on it. I think I just think it's very unlikely.
What? But you couldn't put a number on it.
No, of course not.
So it could be 49%.
Well, it would be. I mean, I think it's unlikely, but it's quite far from 50%.
How do you know?
I don't know. I mean, I put an argument in the book.
Well, then who did create the heavens and the earth?
Why do you use the word who? You see, you immediately beg the question by using the word who.
Well, then how did it get created?
Well, by a very slow process.
Well, how did it start?
Nobody knows how it got started. We know the kind of event that it must have been. We know the sort of event that must have happened for the origin of life.
What was that?
It was the origin of the first self-replicating molecule.
Right, how did that happen?
I told you we don't know.
So you have no idea how it started?
No, nor has anybody.
Nor has anyone else. What do you think is the possibility that intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics or in evolution?
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer.
Wait a second. Richard Dawkins thought intelligent design might be a legitimate pursuit?
And that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe. But that higher intelligence would itself have had to have come about by some explicable or ultimately explicable process. It couldn't have just jumped into existence spontaneously. That's the point.
So, Professor Dawkins was not against intelligent design, just certain types of designers, such as God.
So the Hebrew God, the God of the Old Testament, he doesn't exist in your view?
Certainly. I mean, that would be a very unpleasant prospect.
And the Holy Trinity of the New Testament?
Nothing like that.
Do you believe in any of the Hindu gods? Like Vishnu?
How can you ask such a question?
You don't?
How could I? I mean, why would I, given that I don't believe in any others?
You don't believe in the Muslim God?
No. Why do you even need to ask?
Well, I just wanted to be sure. So you don't believe in any God anywhere?
Any God anywhere would be completely incompatible with anything that I've said in
I'm just trying to make sure you don't believe in any God anywhere.
No.
What if after you died you ran into God? He said, "What have you been doing, Richard? I mean, what have you been doing? I've been trying to be nice to you. Yeah. I gave you a multi-million-dollar paycheck over and over again with your book, and look what you did."
Bertrand Russell was at that point put to him. He said something like, "Sir, why did you take such pains to hide yourself?"
But if the intelligent design people are right, God isn't hidden. We may even be able to encounter God through science, if we have the freedom to go there. What could be more intriguing than that?
He's open to intelligent design, just not certain ones.
Well, I'm surprised Ben Stein didn't say, well, where did that other universe come from?
Yeah, they're just kicking it down the road. And he said, well, it could be from an intelligent species from outside long ago. They evolved through Darwinism, but then they had to evolve. We can just keep kicking that down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Where did it come from? So.
All right, what's next week's lesson, guys?
Yeah, that's what I was about to ask. We've a little bit over here.
I haven't looked to decide. But you know, we haven't been in the question of the Bible, we've been in all your other subjects. Is there something here?
You mentioned wanting to do in the schools or teaching, what did they teach, the high school, or what was that?
What every high school student should know about science.
Yeah.
I think
Oh,
it was
I see
Chuck.
that.
I think it was Chuck that said that.
Well, he would like to do that then. I'm open for that.
Okay.
I'm surprised that that's under the question of science. It sounds like the philosophy of science.
Oh gosh, philosophy makes my mind stretch so hard I don't understand it. But I am willing, what every high school student should know about science. Is that what we're gonna do?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Cool.
All right, shall we close the prayer?
Yeah. Lord, thank you for allowing us to gather here and talk about your creation, and we pray, Lord, that what we're learning, Lord, remember it, use it. We pray we continue to learn, and pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.